New York is the greatest city in the world. Say that out loud and almost nobody argues with you. Not in serious conversation, not with real data, not with genuine conviction on the other side. The density of culture, the velocity of ambition, the feeling that the city itself is alive and watching and ready to reward whoever shows up with enough hunger. All of that is true. You can feel it the moment you land at JFK, and the cab cuts through Queens toward the Manhattan skyline. There is nowhere else on earth that announces itself quite like that. But here is what is also true. That same skyline has been watching while the financial reality underneath it quietly broke apart. Not dramatically, not in a single moment, but slowly, the way a foundation cracks before a wall falls. The average one-bedroom rental in Manhattan crossed $4,000 a month in 2024 and kept going. Brooklyn, which was supposed to be the affordable alternative, now has a median home price of $900,000. The people who moved there 10 years ago to escape Manhattan prices are now the ones priced out of their own neighborhoods. This video is not here to tell you that New York is broken, because it isn't. The city works exactly as it always has, brutally efficient at rewarding the people it was designed for, and completely indifferent to everyone else. What has changed is the math, and the math in 2026 has stopped working for a much larger share of the professional population than most people are willing to admit out loud. The number we keep coming back to is 70%, roughly the proportion of New York's professional residents for whom the financial equation no longer produces a positive outcome. Let's be specific about what that means, because 70% is not a small number, and it deserves more than a passing mention. This is not about the people who are genuinely struggling, the service workers, the young creatives subletting rooms in Bushwick, the teachers making $50,000 a year in one of the most expensive cities on the planet. This video is about the professionals, the software engineers, the marketing directors, the financial analysts, the healthcare administrators, people earning between $85,000 and $160,000 a year, people who, by any national standard, are doing well, and who are still losing the financial game in New York, one rent check at a time. Here is where it gets uncomfortable, and where most content about this city refuses to go. When you factor in New York City's municipal income tax, which runs as high as 3.876% and sits on top of an already steep state income tax, a professional earning $150,000 in New York City is sending roughly $21,800 more to the government than a comparable earner in a no-income tax state like North Carolina or Texas. That is not a small adjustment. That is not a rounding error you absorb with a career move or a year-end bonus. That is the equivalent of a full year of groceries, a reliable car, or, in Raleigh, several months of mortgage payments on a 4-bedroom house, gone before a single dollar reaches your bank account. What makes this genuinely difficult? What makes it the most interesting financial question facing American professionals right now is that New York still delivers something real in return. For specific industries, specific career stages, and specific professional profiles, the income premium that New York commands is not a myth. It is documented, it is significant, and it still justifies the city premium for a real and identifiable segment of the workforce. The conversation gets lazy when it pretends that New York is universally overpriced, or that the benefits are entirely imaginary. They are not. But they are also not universal, and they are not equally distributed across every professional sitting in a Manhattan office or a Brooklyn apartment right now. The framework this entire analysis is built on is simple. Who are you? What do you do? And what does the math actually say for your specific situation? Not for the abstract professional the city's promotional materials were written for, but for you. Daniel is a senior software engineer, fully remote, earning $145,000 a year and paying $3,800 a month for a one-bedroom, running the numbers on whether New York still makes sense. Stephanie is a marketing director with 2 kids, a hybrid schedule, and a non-negotiable need to buy a home before her children leave for college. Their situations are different, their math is different, and the answer to whether New York makes sense for either of them is emphatically not the same answer. By the time we finish running those numbers, the tax comparison, the after-housing take-home differential, the mortgage gap between Brooklyn and Charlotte, and the one piece of data about professional networking that most New York professionals have not let themselves look at directly, the answer will not be ambiguous. It will be specific, it will be uncomfortable for some people watching, and it will be exactly the kind of honest accounting that no one else publishing content about this city has been willing to do. New York is still New York. The question is whether New York is still yours. Most people moving to New York for work do one calculation before they accept the offer. They take their salary, subtract their rent, and decide whether what is left over is enough to live on. It is a reasonable calculation. It is also missing the most important variable in the entire equation. Before rent, before groceries, before the subway card and the gym membership, and the weekend that costs $300 before noon on Saturday, New York reaches into your paycheck and takes a cut that no other major city in the country takes. And most people do not fully understand the size of that cut until they are already inside it. The United States tax system works in layers. Federal income tax is the layer everyone accounts for. It is unavoidable regardless of where you live, and at a salary of $150,000, it amounts to roughly $30,000 per year for a single filer under standard deduction. Most professionals build that number into their budget before they sign anything. What they consistently underestimate, or fail to calculate entirely, is what happens when you add the next two layers on top. New York State has one of the highest individual income tax rates in the country, with a rate that sits at around 6.85% at the $150,000 income level, adding approximately $10,200 to your annual tax bill on top of what you already owe the federal government. But here is the layer that most people outside New York do not even know exists. New York City levies its own separate municipal income tax on top of the state tax. It is not an employer contribution, not an optional fee, and not a charge that phases out as you earn more. It is a direct annual assessment on your earned income that runs as high as 3.876% and applies to nearly every resident earning above a modest threshold. At a salary of $150,000, that city tax alone adds roughly $5,800 per year to your total liability. Add the federal bill, add the state bill, add the city bill, and the combined annual tax burden for a single professional earning $150,000 in New York City lands at approximately $55,000, 36.5 cents of every dollar earned, gone before a single personal expense is paid. Now run the same salary through Raleigh, North Carolina, and the picture shifts in a way that is difficult to rationalize away. Federal tax is identical. That layer does not move regardless of where you live. North Carolina's flat state income tax rate sits at 4.5%, which at $150,000 generates a state bill of roughly $6,750. There is no city income tax, no municipal layer, no third bite. The total annual burden in Raleigh on that same $150,000 salary lands at approximately $36,750. The difference between New York City and Raleigh on identical gross income is roughly $18,250 per year, kept or surrendered, determined entirely by your zip code. That number translates to approximately $1,520 every single month. $1,520 is not an abstraction. It is a car payment, a Raleigh mortgage contribution, 4 months of fully funded emergency savings built in a single calendar year, or a meaningful recurring investment into a brokerage account that compounds quietly while you sleep. For Daniel, remote, earning $145,000, trying to decide whether the city he has called home for 6 years is still the city that makes financial sense for where he wants to be in 10. This is the first place the math starts to visibly come apart. The counterargument from New York defenders is legitimate and deserves a direct response. New York salaries are higher. The income premium is real. A senior engineer in Manhattan frequently earns more than the equivalent role in Raleigh, and if that premium is large enough, it theoretically absorbs the tax differential and then some. This argument was airtight in 2015. It held reasonably well through 2019. But remote work has fundamentally fractured its logic. When Daniel's employer went fully remote in 2021, his New York salary did not get adjusted downward. His income premium did not evaporate. What evaporated was the geographic requirement to earn it, and the city tax kept collecting anyway on income that no longer depends on the city to exist. There is one final piece of this that almost never surfaces in honest conversations about New York finances, and it matters more in 2026 than it ever has before. The municipal income tax does not exist in a vacuum. It exists as an implicit fee for access to the city's professional density, its physical network, its proximity premium. That was always the unspoken deal. You pay more to be where the opportunity concentrates. But in a world where 65% of New York professionals report that more than 80% of their key professional interactions now happen virtually, the fee is increasingly detached from the access it was designed to purchase. We will look at that networking data closely in a moment. But before we do, hold this number in your head: $18,000 a year. Because when we layer the housing comparison on top of the tax gap, that number is about to look like the smaller half of the problem. Daniel has been running a version of this calculation in his head for 2 years. He earns $145,000 a year, fully remote senior engineer at a company that has not required him to be in any office since 2021. He stays in New York because he knows the city, because his friends are there, because leaving feels like a decision that cannot be undone. But every few months, he opens a spreadsheet, stares at the numbers for an hour, closes the laptop, and goes back to paying $3,800 a month for a one-bedroom in the Mission District equivalent of Brooklyn. What Daniel has never done, what most people in his position never do, is run the comparison honestly, all the way through without stopping at gross salary. Let's do it properly. Take a professional earning $180,000 gross in New York City. That is a strong income by any national standard, top 15% of earners in the country, the kind of number that sounds like financial security when you say it out loud. After federal income tax, New York state income tax, and the city's municipal income tax, the annual take-home on $180,000 in New York City lands at approximately $109,000. That is $71,000 sent to various levels of government before a single personal bill is paid. Monthly, the take-home is roughly $9,080. Now subtract the median one-bedroom rental in Manhattan, approximately $4,300 per month in 2026, and the professional earning $180,000 gross in New York City is left with approximately $4,780 a month for every other expense in their life. Now run the Raleigh scenario. A professional earning $155,000 gross in Raleigh, $25,000 less on paper, a number that would feel like a pay cut in any negotiation, takes home approximately $102,000 after federal and North Carolina state taxes, with no city tax layer to absorb. Monthly take-home is approximately $8,500. The median one-bedroom rental in Raleigh sits at approximately $1,400 per month. After rent, this professional has approximately $7,100 per month for everything else. That is $2,320 more per month in discretionary income than the New York professional earning $25,000 more per year. The person with the lower salary is keeping more money every single month. Read that again, because it is the number this entire analysis has been building toward. The professional in Raleigh earning $155,000 gross has roughly $2,320 more per month in post-rent take-home than the professional in New York City earning $180,000 gross. Annualized, that gap is $27,840. Real money, spendable money, investable money, the kind of difference that does not show up in a salary negotiation but determines, more than almost any other factor, whether a person is actually building wealth or just generating impressive-sounding income. Daniel is generating impressive-sounding income. The Raleigh version of Daniel is building wealth. The compounding effect of this gap is where the analysis becomes genuinely uncomfortable to sit with. If the Raleigh professional invests that monthly surplus consistently, not aggressively, not in speculative assets, just in a standard diversified index fund, earning an average of 7% annually, The 10-year difference between the two scenarios exceeds $380,000 in accumulated wealth. Not income, not gross earnings, actual net worth, built purely from the difference in what the math allows each person to keep. The New York professional and the Raleigh professional started the same decade with comparable intelligence, comparable credentials, and comparable ambition. One of them has a significantly different financial position at the end of it, and the variable that determined the outcome was not performance, it was geography. This is not a hypothetical designed to make New York look bad. These are the numbers, run honestly, at realistic income levels, with realistic tax rates and realistic rental costs for 2026. The counterargument, that New York's income premium makes up for the tax and cost differential, requires the premium to be enormous and persistent, and for a growing share of remote professionals, it simply is not. The premium exists in finance, in certain media verticals, in early career tech roles, where in-person visibility at major firms still commands a measurable salary bump. It does not reliably exist for the senior software engineer who negotiated their New York salary 4 years ago and has been working from their apartment ever since. Here is the honest version of where Daniel stands. If he moved to Raleigh tomorrow, kept his current salary, which his fully remote employer has no geographic basis to reduce, and rented a 2-bedroom house for $1,600 a month instead of a 1-bedroom apartment for $3,800, his monthly surplus would not just improve, it would transform. The version of Daniel who stays in New York for 3 more years out of inertia will have paid the equivalent of a house down payment in unnecessary tax and rent differential by the time he finally makes the move. The version of Daniel who runs the numbers honestly and acts on them does not need a raise. He needs a zip code. And in the next chapter, we are going to address the one argument he has been using to justify not changing it. Every professional who has considered leaving New York and stayed has a version of the same argument. It is not always about the restaurants or the energy or the skyline, though those things get mentioned. The real argument, the one that survives the tax conversation and the rent comparison and the late-night spreadsheet sessions, is the network. The idea that New York is not just a place to live, but a place where proximity to the right people creates opportunities that cannot be replicated from a different area code. It is the most emotionally durable argument for staying in an expensive city, and it is also the argument that the data in 2026 has done the most damage to. Daniel has told himself this story for 2 years. His professional network is in New York. His connections at the companies he might want to work for next are in New York. The people who could refer him into a better role, introduce him to a co-founder, pull him into an early-stage opportunity, they are all, in his mental model, physically located in Manhattan or Brooklyn, and proximity to them is a professional asset he cannot afford to abandon. This is a coherent argument. It was also substantially more accurate in 2017 than it is today. The question worth asking honestly is not whether the New York network is valuable. It is. But whether that network actually requires Daniel to be in New York to access it. Here is the data that changes the conversation. A LinkedIn workforce survey conducted in 2025 found that 65% of professionals based in New York City reported that more than 80% of their meaningful professional interactions, the conversations that led to opportunities, referrals, introductions, and career-defining moments, happened virtually, not in coffee shops, not at industry events, not in the lobby of a midtown office building. On a screen. 65% of New York professionals, in the city specifically renowned for its physical network density, are conducting the overwhelming majority of their professional relationship building in a medium that works identically from Raleigh, Charlotte, Philadelphia, or anywhere else with a reliable internet connection. This does not mean the New York network is a myth. It means the delivery mechanism for that network has changed in a way that decouples the value of the network from the requirement to live inside it. Daniel's connections in New York are still his connections if he moves to Raleigh. His LinkedIn presence does not update his location and immediately trigger a wave of professional ghosting. The venture capitalist he met at a Brooklyn dinner 2 years ago is still reachable by the same DM that has always been the primary channel for that relationship. The network is real. The geographic lease on it is not. The counterargument deserves honest treatment because it exists and it matters for specific situations. There are industries and career stages where physical presence in New York still generates measurable professional advantage. Early career professionals in investment banking and private equity, where analyst culture is built around in-person visibility and the hierarchy of the trading floor or the conference room, still benefit meaningfully from being in the building. Senior executives navigating board-level relationships in certain media and entertainment verticals report that the deal-making culture in those sectors remains stubbornly physical. Founders raising institutional venture capital from New York-based firms describe a noticeable difference in relationship quality between partners they see in person and those they know exclusively through calls. For these specific profiles, the proximity premium is not imaginary. It is documented and it is real. But those profiles represent a fraction of the professional workforce currently paying the New York premium. For the senior software engineer, the marketing director, the financial analyst, the healthcare administrator, the professionals who make up the overwhelming majority of the city's high-earning resident base, the honest assessment of their daily professional life does not support the network argument with the strength required to justify $18,000 a year in excess taxes and $2,300 a month in excess rent. They are attending the same Zoom calls they would attend from anywhere. They are sending the same emails. They are building the same LinkedIn relationships. The city is providing the atmosphere, the identity, the sense of participation in something large and important. What it is no longer reliably providing for most of them is a professional network advantage that could not be maintained from a different city. There is one more dimension to this that rarely surfaces in the conversation, and it is the one that tends to land hardest when people actually sit with it. The New York network is not static. It has been redistributing for 4 years. The senior engineer who left for Austin in 2021 took his network with him. The marketing director who moved to Nashville took hers. The financial analyst who relocated to Charlotte is still sending the same messages to the same people, from a house with a backyard and a mortgage payment that leaves room to breathe. The concentration of professional talent in New York is real, but it is less concentrated than it was 5 years ago, and the virtual infrastructure that replaced in-person interaction during the pandemic did not dissolve when the offices reopened. It became the default, and the default works from anywhere. We will see exactly what that means for the housing comparison in the next chapter, because the numbers there make the tax gap look modest. Stephanie has done the math on buying a home in Brooklyn exactly 3 times. Each time, she opens the same Zillow filters, sets the bedroom count to 3, and watches the results populate with listings that start at $850,000 and climb quickly past $1 million. She closes the tab. She tells herself the market will soften. She watches her kids get a year older, watches the school year start again, watches another spring buying season arrive and pass, while she keeps paying $4,400 a month in rent for a home she will never own. Stephanie is not bad at money. She is not making poor decisions. She is simply living in a market that has structurally priced out the family she is trying to build. The Brooklyn housing market in 2026 is not a market in any traditional sense of the word. A market implies a relationship between what buyers can pay and what sellers can ask, with some equilibrating pressure that keeps prices tethered to the income base of the people who actually live there. Brooklyn broke that relationship a long time ago. The median home price in Brooklyn crossed $900,000 in 2025 and has held above that level through 2026. The median household income in Brooklyn is approximately $72,000. The price-to-income ratio on the median home, relative to the median income, is over 12 to 1, a number that makes Brooklyn not just expensive, but mathematically inaccessible to the majority of the people who live in it. Stephanie earns $118,000, which puts her well above the borough median, and she still cannot make the numbers work. Let's run the purchase comparison the way it actually exists for Stephanie right now. A $900,000 home in Brooklyn with a 20% down payment of $180,000. A sum that represents more than 18 months of Stephanie's gross salary saved completely untouched. And a 30-year fixed mortgage at current rates of approximately 6.8% generates a monthly principal and interest payment of roughly $4,700. Add property taxes, homeowners insurance, and the maintenance reality of an older Brooklyn building, and the true monthly housing cost lands between $5,800 and $6,200. On Stephanie's after-tax income of approximately $78,000 per year, or $6,500 per month, buying the median Brooklyn home leaves her approximately $300 to $700 per month for every other expense in her family's life. That is not a housing budget. That is a financial elimination. Now Stephanie moves to Charlotte. The median home price in Charlotte sits at $385,000 in 2026, less than half the Brooklyn number, in a city that has been consistently ranked among the strongest job markets in the Southeast and carries school district ratings that compete with anything Brooklyn's best neighborhoods can offer at a fraction of the cost. The same 20% down payment in Charlotte is $77,000, $103,000 less than the Brooklyn down payment, money that stays in Stephanie's account or goes directly into an investment portfolio. The monthly principal and interest payment on a $385,000 home at the same 6.8% rate is approximately $2,000.30. With taxes and insurance, the true monthly housing cost in Charlotte is approximately $2,500. The difference between Stephanie's monthly housing cost in Brooklyn and Charlotte, at identical interest rates, is $3,200 every single month. $3,200 per month is not a rounding difference between two comparable cities. It is $38,400 per year, more than Stephanie's entire federal income tax bill, more than a full year of college savings for one of her children, more than the annual tuition at most private universities in the country. Over 10 years, at a modest investment return of 7%, the compounded value of that monthly difference exceeds $500,000. Stephanie is not choosing between Brooklyn and Charlotte. She is choosing between a life where the housing cost consumes every dollar her income produces and a life where the housing cost leaves enough room to actually build something. That is not a lifestyle comparison. That is a wealth-building decision with consequences that extend 20 years into her family's future. The quality of life argument for Brooklyn is real, and Stephanie knows it. The culture, the food, the density of things happening within walking distance, the sense that the city is a living organism that rewards curiosity. All of that is genuine, and she has built a life inside it. But her kids are 9 and 12. In 3 years, her eldest starts high school. In 6 years, the college conversation begins in earnest. The version of Stephanie who buys in Charlotte this year is the version who can afford to fund 2 college educations without liquidating her retirement account, who can take a career risk on a role she actually wants rather than the highest-paying option available, who can build equity in a home that is appreciating in a market with genuine population and income growth driving it. Charlotte added more than 25,000 net new residents in 2024 alone. The demand foundation under those home prices is not speculative, it is demographic. And Stephanie, if she chooses to look at the numbers honestly, already knows which version of her story she wants to be living when her kids leave for college. We have run the tax comparison. We have done the after-housing take-home analysis. We have looked at the network data and the mortgage differential and the compounding wealth gap that opens up quietly between two professionals on comparable salaries in different zip codes. All of that analysis was building toward this moment. Not a hedge, not a list of factors to consider, not a gentle suggestion to consult a financial advisor. A verdict, because the data has earned one, and you watched long enough to deserve it. Here is who still has a genuine, data-supported, financially defensible reason to be in New York City in 2026. First, professionals in investment banking, private equity, and hedge fund management at the institutional level, where compensation structures include carried interest, co-investment rights, and bonus pools that are directly tied to physical proximity, to deal flow, and senior partnership visibility. The income premium in these roles is not marginal. It is structural, it is large, and it does not replicate in Charlotte or Raleigh at any salary level currently being offered in those markets. If you are a second-year analyst at a bulge bracket firm, or a junior partner at a fund with a genuine carry allocation on the table, New York is still the place where the math works in your favor, decisively and without serious competition. Second, early career professionals in their first 3 to 5 years in highly competitive industries where in-person visibility, mentorship density, and the speed of professional development are genuinely accelerated by proximity. The software engineer who is 24, learning fast, and building the kind of professional capital that comes from being in the room when decisions get made at a major firm, that person is making an investment in their career trajectory that may well justify the tax and cost penalty for a defined period of time. The key word is defined. New York as a career investment has a time horizon. New York as a permanent lifestyle default, regardless of whether the career still requires it, is where the math stops working. Third, professionals in specific creative and media verticals, certain corners of publishing, film production, high-end fashion, and live entertainment, where the work itself is geographically concentrated in a way that has not meaningfully dispersed despite everything the pandemic demonstrated about remote possibility. If your job requires you to be in a specific room with specific people on a recurring basis, and that room is in New York, then the city premium is not a choice. It is a cost of doing business in your field, and the analysis shifts accordingly. These professionals exist, their situation is real, and this verdict respects it. Now here is who the data says should be having a very different conversation. If you are a remote or hybrid professional, earning between $85,000 and $160,000 in tech, marketing, healthcare administration, financial analysis, or any other field where the core work happens on a screen, and your employer has not explicitly tied your compensation to a New York location requirement, the math has stopped working for you. Not gradually, not arguably, not in a way that requires more information to assess. The tax gap, the housing cost differential, and the networking data all point in the same direction, and that direction is not toward renewing your Brooklyn lease. You are not failing by staying, but you are paying a very large premium for a story about your professional identity that the numbers no longer support. For Stephanie, the verdict is clear, and it carries urgency. She has a window, not infinite, not permanently open, during which her children are still young enough to build their lives in a new city before high school locks in their social world. The Charlotte comparison is not theoretical. It is $3,200 a month in additional savings, 2 college educations that do not require a retirement account liquidation, and a home that builds equity in a market with genuine demographic momentum behind it. The version of Stephanie who waits another 2 years has paid $76,800 in excess housing costs for the privilege of remaining undecided. The data already made this decision. She is waiting for permission. Consider this that permission. For Daniel, the verdict requires one honest question he has been avoiding. If his employer called tomorrow and offered to keep his exact salary with a requirement that he relocate to their Austin office, he would negotiate. He would push back. He would find reasons why New York is important to his work. But if that same employer called and said the role is fully remote forever, which is exactly the situation he is already in, and he chose to stay in New York anyway, he is not making a professional decision. He is making an identity decision and paying a financial penalty to maintain it. That is a legitimate choice, but it should be made consciously, with the numbers fully visible, not by default. New York is still the greatest city in the world. That is not irony, and it is not a concession. It is simply true in the ways that a city can be great, which have never been exclusively financial. The energy is real. The culture is real. The density of human ambition concentrated on that island is unlike anything else in the country. What is no longer real, for the majority of the professionals watching this, is the financial justification for being there. The city has not failed you. The equation has. And knowing the difference between those two things is exactly what lets you make the next decision with your eyes open.